Welcome to a very special episode of the Field of 68. Jeff Goodman, Rob Dauster, and we are joined by none other than Dan Gavitt, the Senior Vice President of Men's Basketball. Dan, I believe I got your title correct there. You are the guy that is in charge of the NCAA tournament, more or less. So we decided, since it is the month of March, it's time to bring you on, man. How you doing? It's good to see you.
Great to see you too, Rob and Jeff. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate how you cover college basketball all year round, and no time more exciting than March, of course.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is your 13th year, I think, doing this with the NCAA. And can we start with introducing people to what you do exactly? Because I think a lot of people may be confused at your role in all this. And obviously, you're very involved in the men's and women's basketball tournaments.
Yeah, Jeff, I've been at the NCAA almost 13 years. You're right, and came as the vice president of men's basketball championships, just overseeing divisions 1, 2, and 3 men's basketball championships and the NIT. And over the course of the last decade, I've been fortunate to get some other responsibilities and advancement in my career. So I now oversee the women's basketball championships as well, along with Lynn Holtzman, who's our women's basketball vice president. And then I also oversee our broadcast relationships with CBS and TNT Sports on the men's basketball side, and ESPN on the women's basketball, and all other NCAA championships, as well as the NCAA Corporate and Champion and Partner Program, which is our sponsorship program for all NCAA championships. So my responsibilities and docket is kind of larger than just the basketball championships, but of course they're pretty fundamental to everything we do at the NCAA.
Yeah, they bring in a few dollars.
Right.
All right, the big thing obviously is expansion, and we'll get to this year's tournament and all that. The SEC, I can't wait to talk to you about, because you're a hoops guy. So three of us will talk more hoops probably than anything on this. But tournament expansion, you know where I stand with this thing. I think it's really good where it's at. Actually, I think 64 was the perfect number, but I'm good with 68. I'm good. What I'm not good with is really expanding this thing, because I think it waters it down. And my only idea, if we do expand it, and Rob has heard me say this ad nauseum at this point, is if we're going to do it, do some sort of play-in where the lows and mids, whoever the last ones are in, play the final 4 or 8 highs that are in, because I think that brings some intrigue. That's always the argument, right? The argument is, last year Indiana State, or, the last high major. This year it could be Drake if they don't win their conference tournament, or UC San Diego if they don't win theirs, or the final high major. So, but again, I'm not in favor. I want that on the record, not that it matters. But I want to know from you where we stand with all this, because there was a report out a couple weeks ago from ESPN that it looks like it could happen soon with expansion.
Sure. Well, as we've kind of met with different media members in advance of this year's tournament, it's a natural question to ask, and happy to answer it. The simple answer is that there's not any new news, and as you know, the basketball committees have been talking about whether or not it makes sense to expand the championships for over a year. They're continuing to discuss, analyze, and consider whether or not that would be a recommendation that would go forward. There's nothing that's imminent. We're not expecting any development there, likely before the end of this year's championships. But we are, I would say the committees are giving it more consideration than any time in my 10 plus years at the NCAA. As you both know, it's come up from time to time out of different coaching groups and the like, but this one's a little different because of the transformation committee and some conferences that put this proposal forward for all NCAA championships and basketball in particular. So we've been, pretty far along in the analysis of it, and have kind of narrowed the scope of consideration. But at the end of the day, there's no decision that's been made. There's no intended outcome here either. One of the potential outcomes certainly is still no expansion at all. And if there were to be a recommendation to expand, it would likely be very modest in nature.
Then I need you to be honest on this one, right? When you are evaluating whether or not to expand, how much does Jeff Goodman being firmly against it come into that consideration?
It's huge. It's huge.
Thanks, Dad.
We'll make
Appreciate
sure that every committee member knows exactly where Jeff stands on the issue.
In all seriousness, though, you see the Field of 68 logo we got right here. If it does end up expanding, what sizes are you guys evaluating? Are we looking at 96? Are we looking at 72? Like what are the numbers that we're kind of
Rob wants to know what we need to grab now on
yes.
Twitter, which handles we need to grab immediately.
Fair enough. How do you protect your IP, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's been reported because our president Charlie Bacon has actually said this publicly. It would be in the range of 72 to 76, an additional 4 or 8 teams, if at all. Again, with one potential outcome being no expansion at all. I do think it's pretty safe to say, Rob, that the 96 consideration, that started this way back over a year ago, and actually was a topic back when the latest CBS TNT deal was done, the first one in 2010, it is definitely not on the table. One of the things that's come out of all this analysis is that you would really have to change the whole calendar to accommodate that, either moving the Final Four dates back or starting the conference tournaments earlier, both of which are very challenging, if not impossible, to do contractually, for the conferences or for the NCAA. So no consideration of anything more modest than that 72 to 76 is on the table at all right now.
So when you say that it's difficult to expand the calendar, I'm assuming that you heard Mark Pope say he wants to go to a 40-game schedule. I'm assuming that means it's probably unlikely.
Well, no, I guess I should clarify. I mean, it's changing the calendar in order to accommodate a much larger NCAA tournament. You'd need more dates in order to be able to do that. In expanding the regular season, I know Mark, spoke about 40. There's been some discussion, I think, around more modest expansion potentially of the regular season by adding an additional game or two. That wouldn't, require, well, the 40 would certainly require a change in when we start the season, right? I don't think anyone would say that we could get 40 games into a 22-week schedule right now. If it were only additional game or two, maybe you could accommodate that within the 22-week regular season schedule. But my point was more about the back end and how we would need to alter the back end of the calendar in order to accommodate a much larger NCAA tournament, which again is not on the table at all right now.
Because the CBS is not moving the Masters, more or less.
Yes.
I wish they would, because then I don't know how you feel about this, but I do feel like if it could be a one semester sport and not fight football for as long as college basketball does, it'd be better. It'd be healthier for the game, for the sport, for being able to promote it. We know football, it's a beast, whether it's college football, whether it's NFL. And if we started it in the second semester, it'd be easier for the student athletes too. Has there been any discussion? I know it's been thrown out there for years. Has there been any real discussion about that?
No, not recently at all. I first started a decade or so ago. There was more talk about it at that time, because some of the conferences that are heavily invested in football have, had talked about that because they had challenges and concerns with getting fans into games, in November and December when their football seasons were still very much underway. That seems to have changed to me a little bit. I know we still battle for media attention and, television exposure during November and December, but looking at the SEC this year, they've had great crowds throughout the entire season at Auburn and Alabama and Tennessee and Florida. But no, that's not really has not come up of late, Jeff. And you'd be giving up, there are trade-offs, right? Because you'd give up a very, very valuable time period of March. Not only the name March Madness, but there's not a lot of competition in March. You're ahead of the NBA and NHL playoffs. You're beyond the Super Bowl. You get into probably May if you were to have a one semester sport, and you're dealing with other competition at one level or another. But no, that's really not on the table at all. At least not recently.
All right. So you mentioned some of those SEC teams there. I feel like we are heading into something of uncharted territory when it comes to this year's tournament because of how big some of these leagues are and how deep the SEC is overall. We hear all the time about like the bracketing principles. You can't put two teams in the same pod from the same conference, right? How do you evaluate that when there are so many teams from one league that look like they're going to find a way to be able to get in, and so many of them are going to be up at the top? Like, will you move teams' seed lines to be able to fit them in so you can work through some of those principles, or is it how do you manage that?
Let me answer that in just a second, Rob, but let me just point out, because we just got off the expansion topic, that, you know, yes, we are experiencing potentially that this year from the SEC, potentially setting a record for most number of teams in a conference in the NCAA tournament, right? And there may be one or two other conferences that are in that ballpark as well. I think we have to recognize that that is the way it's going to be likely going forward. You know, this is just the first year of that, but that is part of the thinking behind consideration of expanding the NCAA tournament, because this is going to be much more the norm potentially going forward, of having, you know, double-digit teams from maybe multiple leagues in the NCAA tournament or under consideration for the NCAA tournament. And does modest expansion help to alleviate some of that while still giving access to all the best teams, including mid-major programs that have had outstanding seasons that, you know, may get squeezed out in a different scenario. So I'm not trying to make the case one way or the other. I just wanted to point that out, that I don't think we should look at the SEC this year as an outlier and something that we're not going to experience on a probably pretty regular basis going forward. But to your more specific question, the basketball committees did anticipate this last summer even, and relax some of the bracketing principles to accommodate for more teams from a league being in the tournament, and how we avoid, you know, conference matchups if at all possible, while without compromising the seed list. So to your very specific question, would the committee consider moving teams up or down a seed line to avoid them playing teams from the same league playing early in the tournament? Simple answer is no. That would be the last resort. You know, I think you know that teams from the same league that have only played once can play as early as the second round. If they played twice, they could play as early as the Sweet 16. If they played three times as early as the Elite Eight, that is still in place. But if there are teams from a conference, more than 9 teams from a conference, we also put in the principles and procedures that to be able to relax that in order to be able to create a bracket that works, frankly. If you have, you know, so many teams from one conference in the field. We've done a lot of modeling just, you know, based on projections and like, you know, and we think it's going to work out fine this year, but it's undoubtedly we're going to see more intra-conference matchups during this year and future NCAA tournaments if you have as many as 11, 12, 13 or more teams from one league in the field.
All right, I got a hard-hitting one.
Okay.
Ready? You ready for this one? You've never been asked this one, I guarantee. Who is the highest maintenance committee member you've ever been around in the room? Who is that guy? My guess would be Greg Byrne, but who's the guy who's made the most outrageous demand for food or something in the room?
Probably for more ice cream. Yeah.
Who's that? All right. Who's the guy that just devours the Sunday bar?
They're all pretty easy to work with, Jeff. I'm not calling out any of those guys. They're women.
I'm going to call it Greg Byrne. Even if you're not, I'm going to call it Greg Byrne. Just because it's more fun. It's more fun to get him, to needle him a little bit. It's definitely more fun. So the season started last year, November 4th. Happened to be on my anniversary. And we did 3 games in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It was really good. Like we had really good mid-major games. We've talked about this, you and I, for a few years since the Champions Classic moved back a week. It just doesn't come out with the same vigor that it used to. Is there any thought to trying to, and we have some thoughts on it, and we're going to try to do this this year if we can on November 3rd. Is there any thought to trying to really blow out the start of college basketball, and why? Why can't we do this then? Why can't we have a big game every single night that first month so that every night we're looking at a big boy game? Why can't somebody figure, and I know it's TV networks, but I think it's everybody working together here as well.
I agree, totally agree, and you and I agree on that. Have for some time. One of the challenges in the NCAA in college basketball compared to the NBA, for example, is we don't make the schedule, right? The individual schools and conferences make the schedules, and many times with their media partners, and so it takes several different parties to be involved with making those matchups, and it takes the blessing and support of the coaches more than anything. Right. One of the things that the Men's Basketball Oversight Committee is wrestling with a little bit right now, in light of some changes with the MTE legislation, the multi-team event legislation, is whether we're at a point where adding an additional game or two to the regular season would help with events that, multi-team events or double, triple headers, that are played on neutral sites, because there's been some changes around all that in our current environment. And one of the things that has been discussed is, if you have an additional game or two to work with, are you encouraged more to take risk on, right? Because coaches see this as risk, right? And if they say, okay, I have an extra game or two, I can afford to take a more challenging opponent in my first or second game and kind of build out that first week and opening week. I think we're looking more at an opening week than an opening night, because, like, to your point, you want multiple days of good games, not just one.
Every night. Yeah.
Yeah. But, it takes, honestly, efforts like you guys are making and working with ADs, coaches, and commissioners, as well as media partners, to make that a reality.
Well, I think, too, and this leads me to my next question a little bit, right? Those coaches, you've said this for the last couple of years, and I think you guys have lived true to it as a committee, is if you schedule up in the non-conference, a la Scott Drew this year, right? I mean, he goes to Gonzaga to open the season. They're now kind of on the bubble, probably on the better side of it right now, but you've rewarded those teams for scheduling up in the non-conference, and you've penalized, for the most part, the schools that haven't done it early on. Do you think that will continue this year as we go forward? Is that something that is still a major sticking point with the committee, even though it's flipped over and you've got 5 new members?
Yeah, the committee talks a lot about schedule strength and non-conference schedule strength and quality wins and opportunities. I wouldn't want to go as far as to say that their role is to either reward or penalize a team for how they schedule, because they're really not judge and jury in that sense. But the reality is that in order to analyze and evaluate a team versus other teams that are on the bubble, and then also for seeding purposes, if you don't have those data points, if you don't have those opportunities when you're compared to someone else, it works against you. And the result is you either don't get in the field or you don't get the seed that you think that you've earned. And so, by the very nature of their decisions, I do think that they are, secondarily passing message along to coaches and administrators that it's in their best interest to schedule quad 1 and quad 2 games away from home, because that's how the NCAA tournament is played. It's played against that universe of teams. It's not played at home. And, if you have a weak non-conference schedule, and then even if you do well against a conference schedule that may not be the strongest intra-conference schedule, because we know that they're not all the same with unequal conference schedules, that it's not going to result in what you would like it to. And we have examples of that this year. I'm not going to speak specifically to that. We have them every year, but we have some teams that have pretty gaudy records in major conferences that have piled those wins up against a weak non-conference schedule and then won games against the bottom half of their league. Probably not going to be enough to get them in.
With the league expanding, right? With how big the Big Ten and the ACC and the SEC are, and how many more conference games they have. I know you just mentioned adding another game to the schedule as a potential, but I feel like it's eliminating opportunities for some of these teams from outside that power structure, the A10s, the Mountain Wests, the mid majors of the world, right? How how can we ensure that there is still an avenue for some of those programs to be able to get in, even if they don't necessarily get an automatic bid? Because I do feel like, as much as we love March, the thing that makes it special and sets it apart from any other sport in the world is the ability for like a St. Peter's to make the Elite Eight or Florida Gulf Coast getting to the second weekend. And I do believe that adding more opportunities for programs like that to have those Loyola to the Final Four kind of runs, I think is something that adds a level of charm and spectacle, and that's what makes March special, is those stories. How do we make sure we get more of those teams in?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Rob. And that's one of the things the oversight committee is wrestling with so much in reevaluating that multi-team event legislation. Unfortunately, the reality, like so much in college sports right now, is that we're getting all sorts of legal challenges and legal risk that's in place in any number of ways. And now, recently, even in the MTE and scheduling space, not just from third parties, but also even from our member schools that are saying, we don't want to follow these rules like we have for the last decade. We want to take advantage of new opportunities, maybe around NIL events or, new things that didn't exist just a few years ago. And so as a result of that and limiting risk, we've needed to consider changing some of those things that have done just what you said, and that is provide access to every level of the game for excellent non-conference opportunities on neutral courts that they wouldn't otherwise get. They don't get at home for sure, and they get somewhat on a road against high majors. But the MTEs have really provided that opportunity for great non-conference matchups on a neutral setting where competitively it's more fair and balanced. So wrestling with how to try to make that happen, but to be very candid, it could be a challenge to kind of have those incentives in place that have been there for the MTE structure to assure some level of that, which is disappointing, but it's just the unfortunate reality of the legal environment we're in.
So I'm a huge numbers guy. Dauster knows this. Huge metrics guy. I'm going to ask you the question of, if there's one metric out there that you think the committee members lean on the most, what would it be? What would it be? What is that one that you think? And again, this is kind of a guessing game on your part. I'm not holding you to it, but you're in the room. You know what they're looking at, what they're valuing the most. What do you think it is?
Well, I'll say a couple things. One, I don't think there is one. There's no silver bullet, I don't think. The quadrant system has definitely helped, and the committee definitely, values the quadrant system pretty highly. Now, attached to the quadrant system, as we know, is that's based on the net ranking. So, where teams fall in the quads 1, 2, 3, and 4 is based on their opponent's net ranking for those games. Games played in quadrants 1 and 2 are very important and critically important. Not just how many wins you get, because not everybody plays the same number of games in those quadrants, but what percentage of those wins come against that schedule. Whereas too many losses in quad 4 in particular, or 3, is a problem for teams' resumes. So that I would say that for sure. The other thing is, and these are new, of course, and we don't know exactly how much they're going to rely on them or how they'll perform going forward. But we've added a couple new metrics to the team sheet this year. We lost Sagarin, stopped doing his ranking, so added Torvik as a predictive metric to be inclusive of the other couple that are already there. And then wins above bubble is a new one that we've added to the team sheet as well. Committee members were using that anyways, in the last couple of years, and they thought that it would be good to make that more official on a team sheet. And that's been referenced, already, even our selection orientation meeting a couple of weeks ago. And I suspect that that'll be one that is maybe used a little bit more frequently than has been in the past, because it is new and it does give a resume look, a results look at teams compared when their schedules are quite different, right? So I would say that that's one that's emerging of importance.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned those. Goodman has no idea what any of that stuff is. He just finally learned what Ken
Wow.
Palm was about a
I
week
know all
ago.
about WOW. Come on.
Yeah, he asked us the other day what a team's RPI was, so that's where Goodman is when it comes to being up to date on the metrics. I wanted to ask you about the NIT and just kind of the status that I know that the crown has popped up. What is the status of the NIT?
Well, we're excited. Thanks for asking, Rob. We're excited about the NIT. We all know it's the oldest postseason championship, even older than the NCAA tournament. Coming off a really good year, one of the best years in about a decade from last year. It will be a 32-team field again, all games on ESPN. They're excited to still be our partner in that regard. The format's very much the same. Games in the early rounds on campus sites. And then the semifinals and championship game will be back at Hinkle Fieldhouse at Butler University this year, where we had that historic place host last year when Seton Hall beat Indiana State for the championship. We brought back some measure of the automatic qualifiers too. So teams with a combination ranking of 125 or better when their regular season ends qualify automatically for the NIT now. So we have about a half a dozen teams that have already qualified: Lipscomb, High Point, Chattanooga, Northern Colorado, McNeese, Drake, and soon to be Yale and Akron when their seasons conclude, because they're in the driver's seat in their regular season standings. Of course, any or all of those teams are going to play in their own conference tournament, hope to win a bid to March Madness. But we're excited that should they not win their tournament, that we will have them back in the NIT. And then we will have at least two, likely three teams from the ACC and the SEC. And we're still hopeful to have a team each from the three partner conferences with the college basketball crown: the Big East, the Big Ten, and the Big 12. And we'll have, we think, as many as 16 different conferences represented in the NIT, which makes it one of the most inclusive postseason events, along with the NCAA championship. And excited about to see how it plays out. But you're right, Rob. It's definitely a more competitive marketplace now with the crown, and we know we're going to lose some teams to the college basketball crown in Las Vegas, but we think we have a great opportunity and a really good field and format set up for another great NIT.
All right, so few people defend the referees more than me. I love the refs, I do, but what I don't love are them going from like LA, doing a game, LA at 8:00 Pacific time, then getting a red eye or something, or early morning flight, and then you see them the next afternoon doing a game on Saturday in Iowa or something like, or even Jersey, something crazy. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we don't have a universal assigner, some system here where, again, you're keeping Roger Ayers or the best guys, which, I'm not sure I put John Gaffney as the best guy, but I don't want to feed his ego. But some of those best guys, you want to keep them so they're not flying all over the country for no reason. Why hasn't this happened? Like, why can't we do this then? Because it's good for the sport to have these guys as fresh as possible when it matters in February and March.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you at all, Jeff. We've gotten some ways a little bit better, because now, rather than having 32 different conferences having their own coordinators, there's consortiums that are, there's half a dozen of them that control nearly all of the assignments, and so there's a little bit more collaboration in how those games get assigned, but it's still imperfect versus having a single entity make all those assignments and thus avoid some of the travel and multiple days that you speak of. They're all independent contractors. The control over schedules is one thing that defines independent contractor status. So, it's just a complicated kind of legal issue to continue to consider, but it hasn't been taken off the table by any means. I mean, I do think, and the other thing that plays in this is, conferences are competitive for the best referees in the country too. So, getting all the conferences to agree to share and thus maybe lose some assignments of the best officials because they're working a different league when they want to have them working in their league is part of the, equation that we have to consider as well. But
keep them close to home. Like there's certain guys, you live in the Midwest, you do a lot of Midwest games. Maybe you go out for a trip to out West and you do 2 or 3.
I got a better answer than that, Goodman. I got a better answer than that.
Go ahead.
How do we eliminate 38 monitor reviews in the final minute of every single game? You want to get these guys rested, get them out of the games. Every game 30 minutes earlier if we can get rid of some of these monitor reviews late. We got to change this rule. Can we get
we
a
need
coaching challenge or something? Everyone gets one challenge a half. You get another one if you get the second half one right.
I'm glad you brought it up, Rob, and I agree with you. And I thought that's where Jeff was going with his question, because this is a playing rules issue. It's not an officiating issue per se, right? Because they're permitted to go to the monitor, they do. We have to clean that up with the playing rules committee, and I think part of the way to do that potentially is to add a coach's challenge or two to, and eliminate some of the automatic reviews that are happening right now that are elongating the end of games necessarily. And so we're experimenting with that in the NIT this year. This year in the NIT, officials will not be able to go to the monitor unless a coach challenges an out of bounds or another violation, and if they're unsuccessful, they'll lose the timeout. So it's getting where we need to go. Ultimately, it'll give us some data for the rules committee to consider in May. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that that's an area we have to get better in. And even just, I would also say in my observations watching, so many games this year is we need to get a little bit better with just the game administration itself. Getting subs in and out, getting teams out of the huddle after timeout, getting the ball inbound and after a foul call or a violation, getting free throws shot in a timely manner. Like, we're bleeding time by just, not everybody kind of being where they're supposed to be. And that's everybody. That's not any one particular group's fault, but I believe it's officials, players, coaches, all have to be on the same page to kind of administer the game in a more timely fashion, because having games go 2:15, 2:30, you see on weekends when TV is scheduling in 2-hour blocks and we're consistently, missing those blocks, and it dominoes across the entire day, right? And you see games.
All we watch is the second half of games, Dan.
Yeah. They're starting games on streaming and missing the start of games, and it's just not good for the game overall. So we're going to work on that. That's very much a priority for the spring.
I got one more for you. Automatic ejection anytime someone goes like this on an out of bounds call with 18 minutes left in the game. You go like this with 18 minutes left, you get tossed. Get out of here.
So who's in charge of so that's the rules committee that's going to be in charge of that?
Yeah, and the competition committee too. So the rules committee is divisions 1, 2, and 3. We have a division 1 competition committee, and they weigh in on matters like that as well.
How many committees right now? If I asked you, how many committees are there in the NCAA? Could you give me an answer? Could you even be within 5 if I said how many committees are there?
No, I couldn't, because I just try to focus on basketball, and there's too many on the other.
I say there's the over-under on the amount of committees in the NCAA. I'm guessing 73.
Oh, I think it's probably over that. No, I think it's well north of that, because you got divisions 1, 2, and 3 and right. And all that. One of my biggest eye openers, one of the first couple of years I was at the NCAA, I kid you not, I was on a call and someone mentioned that something came out of the committee on committees. Wait, you've got to be kidding. We can't have a committee on committees.
Committee on committees.
Fair enough. We got a committee on committees.
I wonder who was running that one. Yeah. I think Warlock. Warlock probably is running the committee on committees.
Probably so. But credit to Charlie Baker, our president. He's former governor, as you guys know, state of Massachusetts, and I think he's been focused on trying to, limit bureaucracy and limit some of the decision by committee, because it's not a very efficient way to do business.
I love Charlie. I will say that. Met him several times. Obviously, grew up in Massachusetts.
Did you vote for him?
I think he's doing an incredible job. Trying to get this thing right in the evolving world of college athletics. So
they don't allow Goodman to vote. There's an IQ level required to be able to vote in the state of Massachusetts.
I voted for Charlie. I absolutely voted for Charlie.
All right, I thought you were the answer. But
last thing I have for you.
Yeah.
Is it too? So San Antonio this year, love the Riverwalk, love the weather, all of it. Indy in 2026 and again in 2029. Love it. The weather can be a little bit iffy, but I love the compactness of Indianapolis. And sometimes you do get good weather, and there's so much tradition there. Vegas in 2028. Listen, I mean, I would have it in Vegas every year if it were up to me. Every single
to
year.
invoice you for his blackjack losses. Okay, that's not coming.
That is not good. Yeah, that's not good for me being out there. I lose in blackjack like every time I'm with Dauster, and then when I'm not with Dauster, my record is actually really good. So it should tell me something, Dan. I should be smart enough to learn. Never play blackjack with Rob Dauster. I have a look. 2027. Can we make a little bit of a swap here? I just moved to Charleston. I know the arena is not huge, but the weather, man, it's sunny. It's beautiful. Instead, I got to go buy a winter jacket and go to Detroit. Last time I was in Detroit, it snowed. It snowed, Dan. Like, what are we doing here?
Well, Tom Izzo and Mark Hollis wanted it in Detroit, and so that's where we're going to be in 2027.
Oh, I'm blaming Izzo? I got to yell at Izzo for this.
Yes.
All right.
He helped sell the committee on it. And no, look, they did a great job in 2009. They're very anxious to get it back. That city's on a rebound, and they did an unbelievable job with the NFL draft. And so we're excited to go back there. I get your point. You have favorites. We all have favorites. I love Charleston.
I just want warm. I don't even care about favorites. Just give me warm, because although now it might be different with me living in Charleston, might be a little different. When I was in Boston in the Northeast, this, like you wanted to go warm. In April when it came around, you were so excited to get a few days of not wearing the winter jacket, not walking in the ice and the snow. So, all right, I'll embrace Detroit as much as I possibly can, but I'm still going to yell at Izzo and Mark.
I'll tell you this too. If let's just say that you decided to move the 2027 Final Four from Detroit to Charleston, what would happen is after 2026, Goodman would call you up and he would say, "Listen, Dan, can we move this? I want to be somewhere else. I live in Charleston. How are you going to put the Final Four where I live? You're never going to make the man happy."
I'll host a huge bash here. Are you kidding? I will host. If you bring this thing to Charleston, I promise you, I'll at Halls or wherever. I mean, there's a new one, Marbled and Finn, great steak place now that will go, Dan. Dinner's on me. If you get this thing to Charleston, I promise you, you will not have to pay for a single thing when you come to Charleston. Not one.
Well, interestingly, Rob, I've been to the Charleston Classic pretty regularly, and I've yet to have an invite out for dinner.
Sounds about, yeah, there you go.
You're
Goodman
in and out. Hey, no, I don't want to hear this. You're one day in and then you're going to the next place. Don't blame it on me.
I have no other option. I've got no invitation, so I can control my schedule.
Listen, Dan, it's great to see you, man. It's great to catch up. I'm sorry you had to put up with Goodman for the last 30 minutes, but that's the life you chose here.
Yeah, you too, Rob. You got to put up with him more frequently than I do. So God love you for that. But seriously, thank you for the opportunity. Great talking with both of you guys. I can't tell you how much I appreciate, and so many people appreciate how you cover college basketball. And I don't know how you do it with the number of hours you put into it, and the passion you put into it, but it's appreciated. And keep doing what you're doing. And thanks for your input on the start of the season as well, and what you're trying to do to improve upon that. It's pretty awesome. And hope you guys enjoy the coverage of March, and thanks again.
Likewise.
Doesn't get better than
Likewise, Dan. We appreciate everything you do for the sport. You're as class as it gets. I know it's not easy. I know you take some daggers from people, but ultimately you're always what's good for the game. And I know everybody around the sport, coaches, media, everybody appreciates what you do, and appreciates how you carry David Warlock as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.